Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
That's you confirmed live.
Okay, members, thank you. We are now commencing our meeting today of the Committee for Communities. I would like to remind anyone in the public gallery mobile phones must be turned off. Tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Use tablet devices discreetly, a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and please be aware of cameras when using the tablet device, and I would also remind everyone about the sensitivity of the microphones. So moving into item 1, apologies. Clerk, do we have any?
I have not received any.
No. Members aware of any today?
Sure. Morris Bradley.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Okay, members, thank you. So moving on then, in terms of Chair's business, nothing to report in that sense, so I'm content to move on then to item 3, which is the draft minutes from the meeting of the 25th of April, and those are contained at page 6 there of your meeting pack. Members, are you content to agree the minutes of 25th of April 24 as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Item 4 then, matters arising, and there are a few. So you've been provided at page 18 with a reply from the Minister there, members, in relation to housing as a standalone outcome in the programme for government. The reply states that this will be a matter for the Executive to collectively prioritise and consult upon. The delivery of good quality, affordable and sustainable homes is a priority for the Minister, and he will highlight this in any forthcoming discussions around a new programme for government. Do members have any comments on that, or are they content to note? Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. I think given the fact that the Minister now says that this isn't for him, this is for the Executive, perhaps we could write to the Executive to ask for an update on the housing outcome for the programme for government. This was already agreed in New Decade, New Approach by all parties. So to not have one would be resigning back from that position. I think it would be useful to hear from the Executive there, including it.
Yep, members content. Yeah. I have to say, I would actually. I was a little surprised to see. I thought the Minister would have been pushing, given the key pressures on housing, that the Minister would be advocating strongly for that. So I would like to see that be the case as well. But I think that's appropriate to do that also. Okay, members content then with that? Thank you. Members, at page 20 there, you have been provided with a reply from the co-ownership on completions by council area and assembly area during 23-24. Any comments on that, or content to note for now, members? Yep, content. Go ahead.
Just one comment. Obviously, it's what I've kind of predicted anyway. There is, disparities between council areas and constituencies in relation to the take-up of co-ownership. So I'd love to see maybe right back to the co-ownership as to what steps are they taking to try and address it, if they can. It would be useful.
Yep. Members content with that suggestion? Yep. Thank you. At page 22, members, then there's a reply from Carers NI in relation to Carers Allowance in the south of Ireland. Any comment from members? Yeah, content to note. Thank you, members. At page, on the table papers, page 49, there's a departmental reply in relation to neighbourhood renewal. The policy framework for neighbourhood renewal is the People in Place strategy, which was first published in 2003 and was subject to review in 2014. The legislative framework for the delivery of that strategy is in the Social Need Order 1986. The current People in Place strategy is being reviewed. The drafting of a strategic document will take place over the summer months in advance of a full public consultation exercise, and the Department will ensure that the Committee is kept informed of the progress of both the collaboration initiative and the work of the development of the new strategy. Members have also requested an in-person briefing from officials in relation to neighbourhood renewal as one of the actions emerging from last week's meeting, you will recall. Do members have any comments or they wish to anything to note in relation to that? Go ahead.
And I welcome that we are going to have a briefing on it, but it's just two areas, the collaboration, that test and learn initiative. I would like to hear more about it, when did it begin, what it actually involved, and then obviously secondly they're scoping, obviously exploring tackling the place-based approach, including the use of specific legislation. Just those two areas. I think I'd like to know more about it in relation to if it's feeding into obviously a final consultation and a plan over the summer months.
Yeah.
What is them two areas, because I don't have any detail on it, or I'm not aware of the detail around both.
Yeah, I think that's useful, and actually I say that as someone who did take part in the initial meeting of the Test and Learn in Aughnacloy, which is one of the areas, but it wasn't immediately clear what the outcomes of that were going to be. There is a follow-up meeting scheduled soon, but I think it is useful for all members to get what the potential of that is, how we might best exploit it. So Clerk, are you content with the request?
Right back to those 2 points, yeah.
And members content? Yep. At table papers again, members, page 51, there's a departmental reply on gambling legislation. The Minister here has concluded that it would be impossible for a bill of the magnitude and complexity required to be drafted and to have made its way through all Assembly scrutiny and legislative processes before dissolution. He has therefore decided not to proceed with full regulatory reform at this stage. The Minister has, however, instructed officials to provide him with an initial set of gambling industry codes of practice for consideration. The Department has recently commissioned a survey of gambling prevalence among randomly selected individuals aged 16 and over, and the Department would be happy to brief the Committee on the results once they are published. So I want to say myself in relation to that, I recognise that this is a large and a complex piece of legislation, but it's an important piece of legislation, and in that context, to me, it will be important that a start is made. And the most disappointing thing in this is that it doesn't even indicate that drafting will commence to be ready to bring forward to the new mandate. So I think that's regrettable, I have to say. You know, I think it's recognised that this is an area that can cause significant harm, and because it's so complex, I think it's more important. Even if we hadn't got it through this mandate, and I accept that may be the case, but we could have it ready to hit the ground running for the next. But in this case, it would seem, going to be starting from scratch again, and I think that's maybe something that's an oversight, and the work should be at least started. Any other thoughts, members? Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. I worked on this with others during the last mandate. I appreciate that the next piece of work that is these guidance notes, and that was very much part of the legislation before. First of all, to say, can we get copies of those guidance notes, because it would be very useful for us to see before anybody starts to lobby us about the future of gambling legislation. I appreciate that the next piece of gambling legislation is going to be assumed to be around about 900 clauses. It's a huge piece of work. However, my concern is at the moment that we have in Westminster online protections of online things happening, and we don't have them here in Northern Ireland. Our representation in Northern Ireland is covered by Ofcom. In advance, whether there's legislation or not, could I perhaps suggest that we find out from Ofcom what their role is currently with the online protection of online, because that does include gambling. We know in the last mandate that gambling was an issue, the online gambling was an issue, because largely it's offshore. So how do you legislate for that? How do you regulate for that? But it would be interesting just to see the outcome of what's happening in Westminster with what Ofcom's work is here, and where there are gaps. So at least then we're aware as a committee in advance of what may come forward. I know that the Minister's talking about not bringing forward legislation. It just means that Northern Ireland's out of line with the rest of the UK.
And I think potentially the rest of the island of Ireland as well. I think there is gambling legislation progressing in the 26 counties as well.
Just one other comment as well. Obviously a bit disappointed that we couldn't begin, as you say, particularly looking at what is required and the work that the committee previously done on gambling. I think there was an assumption out there that we would continue in this mandate and at least look at areas that we could potentially look at. Obviously, I do welcome the ongoing work in the industry code of practice, and I agree with Kelly. It'd be really, really good to see where we're at with that and what it's covered. And then also just on the commission, the research that they've currently commissioned, the survey, I wouldn't mind actually seeing a copy of the actual survey, so it gives us a better idea and understanding of kind of key areas, whether it's the land-based gambling, online gambling. They say it's more detailed by characteristics of individuals, but likewise just regarding geographies as well in areas, because obviously where betting shops are, etc., may have an influence as well on the number and type of people who are frequenting gambling. So I would be interested just to see the actual survey, or maybe it's online and we can access it somewhere.
So at this point, we have already written to Ofcom on foot of a previous request and asked for a briefing, and we've also been told we can have a briefing from the department. Is this an additional letter to go with points to prepare for the briefing, or are we seeking a response in writing?
No, that's fine. If it's points for the briefing, yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's adequate. Yeah, given.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Brian.
so just we will be getting a briefing on what the Minister has requested the Department to do regarding the existing codes of practice then?
It was an update on progress towards on gambling reform is what we asked for from memory.
Well, if he's asking his officials to compile the details of existing legislation and codes of practice, I mean, obviously we would want to get the detail of that.
Well, that's
and also a timeline for the survey.
I think just to clarify for Brian, when this committee in the last mandate brought forward the gambling legislation, the codes of practice are something that's required in the last piece of gambling law. So it's not that the Minister's bringing it forward, he has to do it. And it was agreed with all of the gambling people who deliver gambling.
Yeah. That will be included in our briefing.
Okay.
Members content?
Yeah.
Thank you. So moving on then, on page 53 of table papers, there's a ministerial reply in relation to the Scottish model for a mortgage rescue scheme. That reply states that the mortgage rescue schemes elsewhere have been found to be expensive to operate and not particularly effective. The Department has carried out various pieces of research and stakeholder consultation on the mortgage market. Most recently, the University of Ulster's Economic Policy Centre completed research into housing stress following the pandemic. The report was finalised in August 2021, but it did not recommend a mortgage rescue scheme, but suggested that other interventions have been shown to have a greater impact, such as mortgage holidays, payment referrals and timely advice. The letter further describes a mortgage rescue scheme as a complex debt product rather than a housing product, and states that there is currently not sufficient evidence to warrant the establishment of such a scheme here in the North. Do members have any comments? Or go ahead, Ciara.
Just from I read the report myself last night, and I didn't get those conclusions that were derived from the Minister in general. There wasn't, in relation to the mortgage rescue schemes itself, there was one paragraph, 6.48, and it was there was issues with it, and it was due to the ceiling of house evaluations, etc., why there was a low uptake of it. I'm conscious also of the report that it was done during a period of time during COVID, and things have changed. So I believe we need more up-to-date information and clarity. So I think if we could potentially write to the Minister and see clarity on whether there is any longitudinal survey and data gathering exercise being considered here, so we can have more up-to-date information, because we know on the ground in the past few years where I've been dealing with, it is a huge issue. Particularly, and as we know, with interest rates at the minute, I'd like to know levels of repossession and stuff, and I know that information is available. The likes of Property Pal quite recently in a presentation at the Simon community launch, it was really fantastic research and gives you a clear picture of exactly what's going on. So we need more real-time information to be able to then make such a decision. I just don't think this report gives clarity whatsoever for not looking at it and considering how we support those in mortgage arrears, those that are currently on interest-only mortgages and stuff. I think it's an issue that we really need clear understanding and get a clear picture of where we're at.
Yeah, thank you, Ciara. Sian and then Kelly.
Yeah, it was really actually one of Ciara's points was what I was going to bring up about how this report was based around the pandemic, and I don't think that is a clear picture, and it is a succinct picture of what's going on now. So it absolutely echo the need for either longitudinal or more up-to-date research. I don't think it's clear enough from one report to base a decision, and I don't think that what we have in front of us from the Minister accurately depicts what was in that report.
Ellie?
I was just going to say, we already have it within the Department for Communities, the rates relief that people can claim whenever they've gone on to benefits and they have a mortgage and there's issues there, so they can do that. So the department will have figures on the growth or not of the number of people who are seeking support. I think that this report, as others have said, was written at a time that was before the cost of living crisis, and if the Minister is very keen to help people on low incomes, including those in work, then just not thinking about doing anything to help people who are in mortgage arrears, I think is a bit short-sighted. We don't have any other houses for people who lose their mortgages and lose their houses to move into, and it will just add to our housing crisis. This is one of the mechanisms that could have helped. It might have been a pot of money, yes, that we would needed to have drawn into, but it might have prevented further problems with our homelessness lists. So I think I just agree with the others to say that I think that the department does have further information to go back over a report that is a few years ago now. The other thing I think we might want to do is to write to the authors or the University of Ulster to ask if they have an update.
Yeah.
Yeah, and funny, that's the element of it that I would like some further info. We've carried out various pieces of research and stakeholder consultation. I would like to know the detail of that, particularly the stakeholder consultation, but also the various pieces of research and what those reports said. And I do have a wee concern around mortgage holidays, more or less because I've come across this one. I don't know about the other ones, like timely advice clearly is always a good thing. But the mortgage holidays are not as straightforward sometimes as people maybe think they are, and they have knock-on impacts. I'm not so sure that's appropriate in every situation. I'm not so sure that people are being told what the potential other impacts of that would be, such as if you needed to take one again, or there's lots of other. So to me, it's not maybe an ideal vehicle, but it's probably part of a solution. But I think there's probably other potentials. So members content then to request that further information? Yeah. Thank you. So on page 113, there's a departmental letter in relation to a recent announcement by the Prime Minister on welfare reform. The Prime Minister made an announcement on 19th of April stating his intention to make reforms to the welfare system in the next Parliament. The proposed changes are outlined in the letter. The letter sets out that DFC officials will be working closely with their counterparts in DWP to clarify the details and timelines of the announcement, and will assess the implications for here. Further submissions will be provided when more information becomes available. So this does, I have to say, fill me with concern, this proposal. It would appear that the way it's been presented is that people, instead of receiving the support they need to deal to make their life in some ways manageable or better, that instead will be transferred into vouchers for therapy. Now, I have several concerns on that. First of all, the NHS, to my knowledge, don't take vouchers, so I don't know where that leaves people who need care. I'm not aware of any therapists out there, to be honest, who are not already operating off an extremely long waiting list, so I'm not sure where people would even go in many cases to get therapy. And I do fear that this is a step beyond anything that we can even comprehend the potential outworkings of this in terms of people's lives. And I'm extremely concerned that it's something that we're going to struggle with. Clearly, we know about the issues around parity and all of that, but I just don't understand the rationale for this. There doesn't seem to be any compassion or consideration here for genuinely supporting people who need it. Kelly.
The line that really draws to me is on 114, page 114. Anyone who doesn't comply with conditions set by their work coach will have benefits removed entirely after 12 months. Yeah. How many people do we have in Northern Ireland that may fall into that? What are the conditions that they have to comply with? Given the fact that it's all online and you don't get face-to-face access to work coaches, what's the qualifications of these work coaches to take and make that type of decision? We know that our own Department for Communities, to be fair to the Minister and to his staff and Paddy and the guys in that team, that they try to carrot rather than stick with people, and that's much appreciated. Try not to take people to a sanction. I just don't know in Northern Ireland if we will have the capacity to keep that sanction-free approach, or sanction as the last option approach. Creating a new civil penalty to be applied to a wider range of benefit fraud. Is that something that's being brought in from Westminster, where we will have no say over that, given the fact that benefits are devolved? There's a number of issues there that I think warrants an update from the department.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Sian?
Yeah, just what Kelly said, really. I coupled with, I think, the narrative that's coming from the government through either their ministers or their representatives, it's just really, really worrying. And they are creating a narrative around people with illnesses, this attitude that you, rather than getting a cash payment, can get vouchers. There was a disability campaigner online saying, that's not going to pay for my car, that's not going to pay for the care that I actually need to live my life. They don't take vouchers, it's just, and that line that Kelly referenced on 114 about the sanctions after being taken away after 12 months, I think that it absolutely lacks compassion. It lacks the basis of what the social security system should be. So for me, it's really looking at what measures are going to be in place to support claimants who have difficulties adhering to those stricter requirements of the scheme, those with care and responsibilities, those with complex health conditions. What flexibility and discretion, if any, are going to be exercised by those work coaches when agreeing the commitments, particularly when people are facing personal structural infrastructure barriers to actually getting into work. And then how does the government plan to ensure that transition over considers the individual circumstances, and as Kelly pointed out, what qualifications and what background will these work coaches have? If you're taking that away from GPs, that's one thing to alleviate the pressure there, but again, do we have the infrastructure and the personnel and the resources that are properly qualified and actually can take in the holistic view of the person when they're doing those?
Yeah, and one of the other things that strikes me about it doesn't appear to take any account of the fact that, and I've raised this before in the committee, this term of economic inactivity, kind of almost judgmental, whereas it's economic disadvantage, but it takes no account of the historic disadvantage that a lot of these people will have faced right throughout every aspect of their life and society in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of transport, they will have been disadvantaged against quite heavily right throughout, and there's no I don't see any cognizance of that whatsoever.
Sure, it's that comment that Les Allenby made about some people are starting in lane 1, some people are starting in lane 8. You know, that
Some people we tie, and in lane 8 we're starting to tie their shoelaces. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so members content, clerk, are you content? You have the detail of that to make the request?
Right back to the department for it in writing, yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Will we ask for a time for that briefing? They said they're working with officials from DWP, or as soon as available, or?
As soon as possible, yeah.
possible. There's already fear out there, so the quicker we can get information, the better.
Okay, thank you, members. So we are now moving then to our first briefing of the morning, and that is Sport NI. So you have been provided there with a copy of the briefing paper at page 25, and with a copy of Sport NI's annual report and accounts for 2022-23, which is at page 30. So we now welcome to this morning meeting Richard Archibald, who is interim CEO, Brian McKim, interim COO, and Simon Burrows, accountant with Sport NI. So Richard, if I could invite you to make a brief opening statement, please, and before we move to questions and answers from members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to the committee here this morning. It has been a challenging couple of years for Sport Northern Ireland. Many of those challenges that we have faced have been laid out in the annual report and accounts, and also covered within the media. The critical thing for me to talk about today is about the work that we've done over the last 8 or 9 years, or 8 or 9 months, apologies, about the work that we have done in trying to identify the causes and contributing factors to some of the challenges that we've had, and also how we've tried to set that right and progress that work. And also about the support that I have received from my board, from DFC, from the leadership team we have in place at the minute, and from the staff of Sport Northern Ireland, in trying to address the challenges we've identified, and also to allow us to shift more and more back to supporting sport and physical activity within our communities. Hopefully you'll get a sense that actually the main focus of this time has been to stabilise the organisation, and we continue to do that work. I want to see Sport Northern Ireland maximising the resources that we have available to us to support our communities and society with sport and physical activity. And over the last year, Sport Northern Ireland has continued to grow opportunities for sport and physical activity. We've worked to tackle inequalities and to improve the quality experience of participants. When we've done that in a number of ways, we've continued to support governing bodies of sport. That investment has grown from about £4.9 million a year a couple of years ago to about £7.9 million this current year. We're broadening out the range of governing bodies that we support. Those governing bodies represent about 3,000 sports clubs across this place. And so we've reached out to engage with governing bodies we wouldn't have supported in the past, and supporting 6 new governing bodies last year, including the likes of American football, Olympic handball and kickboxing. We've also re-engaged investment towards councils through community planning. We are statutory partners. We've been heavily involved in the strategic and at the operational level of community planning, but we trialled an approach with the community planning partnerships last year to see what the appetite would be for some investment in that space. There was a really strong support, and actually it was an oversubscribed investment for the resource that we had available. And actually each of the 7 community planning partnerships that did engage tried different things. I think in Derry City and Strabane they used the neighbourhood renewal partnerships to make sure that actually how that resource was taken, it was impacting in their locale. We also recognise that the changing habits of and changing lifestyles for sport and appetite for consumption of sport and physical activity have changed. So we engaged with a range of partners. Within the last year, we worked with Parkrun for the first time, helping to establish 2 new junior parkruns in Ballynahinch and in Portglenone. So we recognise we need to not just work with those organisations we have for a long period of time, but also branch out. And we provide a wide range of enablers to the public, to sports clubs and to organisations, supporting safeguarding, anti-doping, coach development, research into officials, female leadership programmes, water safety, outdoor leadership training, support to our elite performers, targeting the Olympics and Paralympics coming up in Paris this summer, and also through infrastructure, whether that's as a spectator, through stadia safety, through club development, and we initiated a renewable programme for clubs as well within the last year. We don't have a simple metric that sums all that up and really extols how impactful that has been. What we do know is that the governing bodies we support, we're targeting club membership of 411,000 members within the last year. They actually achieved 433,000, a significant increase. And we have a target of within Sport Northern Ireland of having 500,000 club members, and we now believe that's achievable by 2028. That only speaks really to the more formal elements of sport. So we're working with partners to better understand how we can capture the full consumption and the autonomous nature that is now more prolific, especially since the pandemic. How we have delivered that is by maximising the resource we have available to us. I've completed the provisional outturn for the year just past, and it now looks as if we had a £43,000 deficit for 23-24, so within 1% of the available budget. I am passionate about sport. I want to see Sport Northern Ireland delivering sport and physical activity for our communities. I want us advocating for more money, but I recognise that we have to be in a strong position to do that, and that's very much at the heart of the work that we have been trying to do over the last number of months. We have some way to go, but we're making every effort to utilise the resources we have so that we make an impact on the communities that we support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Couple from me then, I'll just go on ahead then to other members. So I note the update there in relation to the backlog in Sport NI lottery accounts. Are you confident that the end of the financial year forecast deadline will be met for those years that are still in arrears, and that there will be no future delays?
So in terms of the lottery accounts backlog, what's important to say is Sport Northern Ireland had challenges about 10 years ago, and both our lottery and exchequer accounts were in backlog at that time. Now we've worked since then very hard. As you see, we've just laid the 22-23, so we've got them all back up to date. In terms of the lottery accounts, we laid 15-16 in September, and we have got a plan in place with the Northern Ireland Audit Office and they've secured resource to try and expedite the delivery. We are also putting additional resource in ourselves to make sure that we can meet that. I think having the necessary financial skills within the organisation has been critical. And that's why last summer we brought in a grade 7 accountant to ensure that we had additional expertise and capacity to deliver that. In terms of the audit plan as it stands at the minute,
So the 16-17 accounts are currently with the National Audit Office for finalisation, so it's expected that they will be completed very soon. 17-18, 18-19 are expected to be done through the summer. The difficulty is largely around the availability of NIAO staff who are doing the audit work with the other work that they do for government departments. We then have a plan in place to take forward 19-20, 20-21 and 21-22 in this calendar year. And that's what the plan is at the moment, and then we will take forward the final couple of sets of accounts once that is done.
Okay, thank you. And I know that we have had some of the sporting organisations in here, and we're it's very obvious, I think, to all of us the benefit that sports bring and the input that a lot of our sporting groups put into communities and their voluntary efforts and all of what they offer, and is very, very worthy of support, and indeed does pay huge dividends. But just to focus a bit then in terms of the public health outcomes, which again we understand are out there, but do you have any way of measuring public health outcomes or kind of benchmarking in terms of your spend and how that's impacting public health outcomes?
We're working with colleagues through the Active Living Sport and Physical Activity Strategy, the Northern Ireland Executive Strategy. I think over the last year we've worked with DFC to establish their cross-departmental group, and towards the end of March we had a meeting of the Strategic Implementation Group, so that was bringing together a number of the councils and the other NDPBs that were potentially supporting this space. So we had councils, we had health trusts there, and other arm's length bodies. So I think what we're trying to do is to work and look with that as a framework, the active living strategy as a framework, how we can capture that. I think with a focus on outcomes-based accountability and trying to have that better aligned towards impact. That's not necessarily how we have measured success in the past. We've done it with some individual programs, but not holistically across the organisation. We have, the measures that we've used could have been, as I say, club membership. But what we're trying to do, especially since COVID, is recognising that we want to be relevant to as wide a range of people as possible, and there's not necessarily a simple metric, as I've said. So we're looking and exploring that through the active living partnership.
Yeah, I think there is a story there to be told if we can capture the data. And I often said within the health committee, what gets measured is what gets done. So I think if we can better quantify that benefit, if that was feeding into the whole social prescribing, into the support for clubs at grassroots level, all of that. And just on a related point, do you have any assessment of the potential benefit to sport and to grassroots soccer in particular around Euro 28?
I think we've engaged in a piece of work around legacy. So there are we've proposed that in our business plan for the year ahead. I think there are opportunities, and whilst Euros 2028 are coming up, and we recognise there's been some investment in infrastructure, but we've specifically been engaged around legacy, working with Department for Communities, the IFA, and at this stage Tourism NI, who are the lead in that space in terms of the event delivery. So I think what we recognise is that's a catalyst, and legacy. From other major events, we recognise is not an easy thing to define, but what we are trying to do is look at that in the context of not just that event, but actually how we capture the legacy of all the work that we do. Because in theory, all of the investment that we make, whether that's into communities, clubs, however, there should be a long-lasting and sustainable legacy, because that really is what sport is about.
Thank you. And finally, from me then is around, and I recently met with the Motorcycle Union of Ireland, Ulster clubs around two-wheel and four-wheel sport, and how that's funded. And I note your focus on trying to get young people in, and that was similarly a focus for them when I met with them around that. But in the context of funding being returned to the department, they feel that more could be done to support them. What's your thoughts on that? Is that something that you're recognise or that you're working on to address?
Governing bodies are a major component of the work that we do, because they do represent a large number of over 3,000 clubs across Northern Ireland. So we think they're a really important representative body, and we've probably engaged with about 30 to 35 governing bodies consistently for quite a significant number of years. Over the last 2 years, we've made efforts to broaden that out. We recognise there are about 80 recognised governing bodies operating within Northern Ireland, and we want to be engaging with as many of those as possible. And that could be advocacy, it could be providing support, helping them to grow and develop, or with financial resource. But we are disappointed if any resource is going back to the department and not being used for sport, and that's at the heart of what we're doing. I think probably the shift in the last year has been trying to ensure that we have sufficient contingency programmes in place. We have the potential for spend, even when it's not fully utilised in the way that it was intended.
Kelly, were you looking into that? Sian?
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you very much for appearing before committee. My first question just really is around governance, and I suppose some of the concerns there around management and the situation. There is a very high turnover of staff that's been shown through the records, and there is quite a high level of the interim positions. Is there anything that can be said around the situation around that, or where that process is, first of all? And second, what specific actions are being taken to address those identified areas of concern to ensure that ongoing stability? In terms of that, is it just with the plan with the audit office, or are there further identified areas that are being worked on? And obviously the independent review conducted by Deloitte will be an important part of that. So I suppose that's my first kind of area.
Thank you for that. In terms of the staffing, I suppose there have been impacts. We went through a restructure that was planned pre-pandemic, and then it was only in 2021 that really was initiated. And I think that did stimulate change within the organisation, the reorganisation, and some staff members did leave during that time, and we brought new people in. I think there's a stabilising element to that as well, and actually. Because not only were we changing the staffing structure, but we were trying to respond to the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think how we have operated, Sport Northern Ireland had operated probably in a relatively consistent way for a long period of time. And actually post-COVID and during COVID, we realised that we needed to respond differently to be meaningful to communities across Northern Ireland. And I think it was in the light of that we were attempting to change how we operate with new staff coming in. But that certainly in the last couple of years, the staffing changes have started to decrease. Continuing to work through that. I think the knock-on effect of some staff being absent at a senior level means that we have a number of people who are operating then in interim roles. But I think in the context of the governance and some of the challenges that are picked out here, the board moved quickly to try and ensure that we had the necessary capabilities, capacity at a senior leadership level to address the issues that we have. I think to your second point, in terms of the Deloitte review, as I say, we're trying to get a stable position at the minute, and then we'll await the outcomes of that report before we'll make decisions about how to take that forward in the most effective way.
Do you know when the Deloitte report is due for publication?
We believe prior to the summer, but I don't have a specific date on that.
I was just going to add on some of those stability measures you asked about. I mean, so the focus has been over the last number of months to try and really get to grips with and understand, where the issues around financial reporting have come from. And the focus is, I suppose, on understanding how we get the early warning systems in place to make sure that if we do have areas of underspend, we identify those at an early stage and can report them through to the department so that we can use those resources either effectively in other programmes within our organisation or release them to the department for reallocation. So the work that the finance team in particular have done is around looking at management accounting, budgeting, and those areas, and then working with budget holders and the people in the sports teams to understand what they can do to flag those issues earlier and so that we can react on a timely basis.
Okay, and that's part of then the new financial system that you're putting in place, is that right?
Yeah, so I mean the Civica system, which was the platform that we implemented, there were challenges around how we did that, and we've worked to try and resolve a lot of those, and we have made a lot of progress, and Simon and the team in finance have made significant steps in that direction. I think the important thing to flag as well is that, in terms of the NIAO report, they do acknowledge that from a financial accounting point of view, the transactions are all, recorded to a high level of accuracy and detail. But our problem was, it's again these early warning systems linking in with resource consumption and the monitoring rounds where we seem to have fallen behind slightly, and our focus has been lost in relation to those areas. So that's really what we're focusing on now as we move forward.
Okay, and Chair, am I okay to keep on? So obviously, I think it's great that you're the contingency programmes and kind of being held on the back foot just on the off chance that there's more money is great. Can I hear, is there any engagement then with, I know obviously there's the elite element, but in terms of that grassroots level that you provide, is there any engagement with stakeholders on a grassroots level then to have some of those contingency plans in place? And then my final question is just, the visibility of women and those with disabilities in sport in Northern Ireland. Are there any specific ways that you're engaging there? Is there any additional spend going to be kind of channeled into that to try and make those who are not as visible and not as engaged in sport, particularly in those two categories, the women and those with disabilities?
In terms of the grassroots and frontline clubs, I think the investment in governing bodies is to support the development of clubs that are happening on the ground. I think we also look to other sports councils across Ireland and the rest of the UK and the programmes that they're doing, and so we're trying to understand what other opportunities are out there. I think during COVID we trialled out a crowdfunder programme, and we found that to be really successful and really positive. That was a club focused programme, so that's something we have build up again, and that's going to be ready to launch soon. So that will be aimed at a specific resource going to clubs. I think in terms of the infrastructure as well, we have relatively limited capital available, and we did go out in 2020 with a capital programme with a relatively small budget of £500,000, and there was a demand of over 13 million for that programme. So we worked over a 3-year period to secure and deliver as much of that as we possibly could. So we are looking at opportunities, I think, in terms of, it's not just resource as well, because there are support elements in terms of club governance and establishing better practices that we provide in the people development space, and coach development and officials and volunteers. So those are areas that we're continuing to look to expand. I think we're getting messages back from governing bodies, and we're going to look at ways of how we can hear from the sector more broadly. That can be through partner organisations, other umbrella organisations as well, the likes of Sported, Disability Sport Northern Ireland, Outdoor Recreation, or Outscape, sorry, as they are now, who can give us a flavour and hear wide views. In terms of your point about females and disabilities, we have focused more of our investment than we had previously for governing bodies and for the council investment, with specific aims around tackling inequalities. So looking to support underrepresented groups, and I think what we now have, the feedback from the year just finished, and actually the plans for the year ahead, are a wide range of initiatives that we don't believe have been delivered before. So that can be female leadership programs, it could be come and try it events, it could be trying to improve board representation, but we did quite a significant engagement over the last 2 years with those governing bodies, again trying to understand their needs and the needs of their members and their clubs, and there was we had an appetite is within our corporate plan, the Power of Sport, that we want to be addressing inequalities. That's it's not just about sustaining sport, it's about doing that in a way and actually addressing inequalities that exist. But there's a really positive response from the sector around that. So both the governing body investment and the council investment had those as key components, and that's really been embraced. And we now have a really rich data source or data set of what was done, which we want to be able to share, and that gives then others a sense of what can be done.
And just, can I ask, do you have targets for that work, or now that you have the rich data, could you maybe send us in the information in terms of targets or how that's...
And I think that's an important thing to flag, that so focus on engaging women and disabled people in all of our programs is the focus. So it's about trying to design that in. It's not that we've specific things we do. It's designed into all of our programs, and we're starting to track those metrics as we move forward. Okay,
thank you, Melissa.
All right. You're all very welcome. And Sean actually probably has broached the question that I intend to ask. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but in BBC Two just 2 weeks ago at the Ulster semi-final between Tyrone and Donegal, there was an opportunity at half-time for the participation of those who are intellectually disabled in many respects. And I was really impressed by that in every respect. I'm really impressed by it too, is that the GA is a very open organisation, and I declare my interest there, being a lifelong member of it as well too. But there was a good opportunity for people to see what is possible. And I just asked the question there, to what extent are you involved in working with the likes of the GAA and helping them to develop and improving the programme that quite clearly they're implementing at the present time? And secondly, do you differentiate in terms of your involvement with sporting organisations that are voluntary and those that are professional?
In terms of the reference to GAA and the programme you're speaking to, I think those are the sorts of programmes that we are eager, that the resource that we are investing are going into. So tackling inequalities, I'm not aware of the specifics of that one, but I can look into that and see if we have specific engagement. We do invest in Special Olympics Ireland for Ulster, and we make an investment of over £700,000 into that, and that's a collaboration between ourselves, DFC and Department of Education. Look, I as well, I'm aware of one of the disability sport groups for learning disabilities that occurs near me, and I think that's where that's not necessarily probably many people's expectation of what sport is, and I think those are the sorts of opportunities that we want to be creating now. It's not necessarily for those that can provide and create those opportunities themselves, and so we do increasingly, we're hearing about the really positive impact of events and opportunities like that, but they are still too few and far between, and I think we want our resource to be going to create more opportunities like that. But I will follow up in terms of that specific case in terms of the GAA.
And just in terms then of other professional sporting bodies.
In terms of the difference between, I suppose we expect probably the majority of sports clubs to be voluntary. Therefore, the sports sector runs on volunteers and volunteerism. So that really is at the heart of what the resource that we're putting out should be there to support. Now we recognise, I have seen in my time in sport a significant shift, a greater professionalism, and even the roles of a governing body where it would have been in many cases very small, and actually they have established more, they have more paid staff in some cases, but the intention behind that would be that it supports the volunteer nature, the volunteer organisations that are out there. So I think sport is increasingly professionalising, but our role is to support the sector as a whole, but that is a mix and a combination of both the voluntary and professional.
I'm really glad to hear that too, because I do know that it is that volunteerism that the GAA totally and absolutely depend on. It such allows that then to be leading the way in many respects on a whole lot of these issues, and embracing both women, the involvement of people, irrespective of what level does that they're at in terms of their capacity within a particular type of sport or game. But they have a significant role there, and I'm glad to hear that's a priority with you as well.
If you don't mind me saying, I think us better articulating those messages. There is so much good practice out there, and in the past, perhaps there were mandated approaches, and that was what was delivered. But what we're trying to encourage is autonomy, and actually that a locally relevant solution has been put in place, but actually then showcasing that, sharing that, so that others can see what can be done. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. Just welcome and thank you for attending today. And first of all, I very much are passionate about sport and physical activity, and how we can encourage that and get as much investment into it as possible. It's basically critical. From a community perspective, and I know in my time to meet unmet need, obviously, and a reference, I just searched it there now because when you began with Active Places, the Active Places Research Report 2009, that was my Bible when I worked in the community and voluntary sector to try and bridge the gap. So at least you were able to identify where you were at in relation to an area that there is huge unmet need in regard to sport, but also physical activity. So I was just in relation to, and I welcome obviously levelling the playing field is there. So how do you, across all your programmes, try to ensure that it's mainstreamed and embedded in, that where the unmet need is in relation to sport, access to sport, particularly access to sport and infrastructure, those two areas, how is that embedded in across your programmes? Or is, and I know you mentioned you're developing a metrics for measurement and stuff, but suppose strategically overall in all your programmes, how is that measured in? And is there any potential, or maybe there is there an updated Active Places Bridging the Gap report done or being done? Thank you.
Thank you. So Active Places was around the facilities and the infrastructure. In terms, what we're aware of is that there are different approaches across the different jurisdictions in the UK and Ireland in terms of identifying need. There are some of the best examples are really strong surveys that actually understand where the levels of activity that exist and the latent demand, and that is the driver for targeting resources, so that it is going to those areas of unmet need. We don't have a structure or setup like that at the minute, and that's why we're trying to understand how we could, looking at opportunities through active living to see how we can best identify not only what the impact is going to be, but actually where the need is and the unmet need, and so that we can target to support that. I think in in terms to access the sport, we are undertaking work around infrastructure to understand the facilities that are available, the resources that are available, and what gaps need to be closed in that space. But currently we're doing our work through a range of partners. We don't have a single approach, a single way of understanding that unmet need. So it's through engagement with this wide range of partners that we're currently gathering that information.
That's something that you should consider. I think that level of research, you need a baseline. If you're going to develop matrix for outcomes, and if you've no baseline, you're really starting off on the wrong foot. And I think it's a critical piece of work that needs to be done. And plus the fact then, it obviously gives your partner organisations that evidence base to support them. And I very much welcome your work at a local council level and with the likes of the neighbourhood partnerships. I think that's fantastic, and that should continue, because that model of partnership work and all those organisations who can collaborate with the likes of Sports NI to actually harness your investment alongside other investment and in-kind contributions. That's how you deliver more effectively and get, as you say, value for your money and impact.
And I think, just to add to Richard's point, I mean, as part of that active living strategy and the strategic implementation group meeting that we held, the first one, that was the big focus of the conversation. It was, how do we actually measure outcomes? How do we get to the heart of what people actually want? So I think, over the next, period of weeks and months, we've got to come up with a way of working with, councils and who are already talking to people in clubs and know what the need is, and then to bring that into a framework that we can use to set some targets.
Unmet need, access,
yeah,
inclusion and infrastructure, that's the 4 areas, and you need a baseline across our district council areas in relation to that, and that should then harness where your investment and resources are. Likewise, and that doesn't exclude it from all the other key priorities in relation to building the capacity of organisations and sporting organisations, facilities, but that work is critical if we're going to develop and improve access to sport in our neighbourhoods and communities. No, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Ciara and Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation today. You've already answered a question regarding the governance issues at Sport NI and what you're seeking to do to manage financial management issues, ensure that budgets are spent. I want to ask a specific question regarding capital funding. It's been reported to me that last year 62% of capital funding went towards GAA clubs compared to all other sports. Would you recognise that figure, or would you be aware of an imbalance in capital funding last year, and what has been done to address that and spread that funding more evenly?
I don't have the figures in front of me right now in terms of that. What I would recognise that we had a relatively small amount of capital available. Is that, do you mind me asking, just in terms of the year, is that 22, 23 or 23, 24?
It was last year, so the information provided to me that it was last year.
Okay. So I think we've relatively small capital programs, and so actually we've a large number of sports and activity groups that don't have infrastructure or don't have significant infrastructure, and because of the relatively small number of programs that we've been able to run, they have specific areas. So there were programs around stadia safety, around Your School, Your Club, and encouraging community use of schools, and there was the building better sports facilities. So I think on a specific each of those programs would have been operating with specific criteria, and depending on the number of clubs, if we look at the reach and the number of clubs, GAA is potentially significantly bigger than many other sports in an infrastructure setting. Therefore, there may be a correlation or the vagaries of how the applicants at that time and the submissions in that year. I think in terms of, we did run or initiate a renewable energy fund in 23-24, and we specifically approached that so that there would be representation across all 11 local authority areas, and we're seeking as broad a range of sports facilities as possible within that. So trying to ensure that there was no single dominance of any of our bigger sporting organisations. But I can look into the detail of the point you've raised. Okay,
but it's something that you will monitor, I'm sure, to ensure there is a spread. I have two other questions quickly, Chair, if I can. In terms of growth areas, and I appreciate your work you'll have a focus on participation. I'm glad to hear you've mentioned that, but you also performance development and also elite performance at the highest level. And with regards to Commonwealth Games, are you aware of any up-to-date information on the 2026? I don't know if there are venue or venues is resolved. But in general, are you working with the Northern Ireland Commonwealth Games Council and the governing bodies to ensure that Northern Ireland has the potential to be represented in every single sport? In some sports there are governing body issues getting in the way of that, but obviously we want Northern Ireland to be represented at every sport, or at least that potential.
Thank you. In terms of Commonwealth Games, look, we've a really strong relationship with Commonwealth Games Northern Ireland, and I've worked with them for a large number of years through the organisation. What we've seen is that relationship strengthen over time, and better collaboration and cooperation in terms of the ultimate aim of actually supporting the sports that those individual athletes will come from, and trying to achieve the best for those athletes when it comes to the Commonwealth Games. What I would say is, and that was probably best exhibited in Birmingham when Northern Ireland had its most successful games, games where we had more female representatives than male for the first time, and great medal success. I think that represented, again, an improved way of working with the Commonwealth Games, where they had certain responsibilities. They were able to engage with sports that we were possibly less active with, and I think that synergy proved to be very successful, and we would look to continue to build on that. There remains uncertainty around 2026 at this stage. We have an investment in Commonwealth Games Northern Ireland, and at this stage that is continuing until there's greater certainty around that. But the Commonwealth Games are a great opportunity for athletes often who compete for Ireland or GB in other international events to compete for this place, and they're proud to do it, which is wonderful to see. So I think we'll await an outcome which hopefully will come soon in terms of certainty around a venue for 2026.
Specifically, Chair, there are some sports where I think Northern Ireland being represented, there are governance body issues. Are you seeking to resolve all of those?
There are, I suppose, the relationship between international federations and the CGF, the governing Commonwealth Games Federation, dictate a lot of those matters. So I'm aware in the past that some bodies have sought to explore that on whether or not teams are possible. But I think that's an ongoing discussion between the international federations and the CGF, not so much Commonwealth Games Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Okay. And the last one, if you have time, Chair, just to ask, in terms of whether there's growth, a growth sector currently is in youth football and female football, girls and women. What engagement is Sport NI having with clubs in that sector? Because the vast majority of sport involvement actually relies on volunteers, and it's right that the support is provided where people are providing that participation. So what engagement is Sport NI having with grassroots sports clubs, helping develop in particular youth football and girls and women's football?
I think our investment in the Irish Football Association has increased in the last couple of years as we've been able to increase our investment into governing bodies. My understanding is a significant proportion of that is going towards female and youth programmes. Again, I don't have the detail right in front of me now, but as I say, IFA, like many other governing bodies, were eager to explore underrepresentation and to try and seek progression. I think this, the prominence, and the continuing prominence of the Northern Ireland ladies football team is making a significant impact in that space as well. And there are I know there's some available resource through money linked to Euro 28. Around improving facilities and I think accessibility, and that hopefully is helping that space as well, creating opportunities for the growth of the female and youth game.
Okay,
thank you, Brian. And just in relation to Brian's first question there, and you touched upon it, Richard, there around the levels of participation and the amount of clubs in that involved in the various codes. Could you give us that information along with the capital investment? And I know just from my own, so we can compare and contrast that, I know from my own club example, I've done a recent Ahaloo GFC, which I'm a member of, have done a recent massive development, invested a lot of money. I think Sport and I think we're almost certainly involved as a part funder of that. The vast majority of it was raised by members of the club, vast majority of it. So do you have a sense of how much additional investment your investment leverages in typically in some of these facilities?
No, I don't. Not at this point, although I can go to our infrastructure team and try and understand. I think one of the challenges we've seen in terms of infrastructure investment is a decreasing availability. What that means is the actual resource that we've been able to put into infrastructure has been relatively small, so they tended to be small scale investment programs that we've operated over the last number of years. I think we would be, eager to that's why we want to understand what the needs are within the sector, but as I said at the start, we have to get other matters resolved before we can go and argue for that resource. But just I think to pick up on your point, and I think it's a challenge in the sports sector, you described your club actually doing a lot of the fundraising and operating the growth itself, and I think that's the challenge that we face, is to differentiate the unmet need and those that can't deliver themselves and those that can. And I think those are shaping conversations that we're having with all of our partners now.
Thank you. Kelly, finally.
Thank you very much, folks, for your presentation. I just start off by saying you've had your woes over the last number of years, and I'm glad to see that the financial backlog is being dealt with, and I look forward as a committee member, having been on this committee for a number of years. There have been frustrations, I have to say, with yourselves during COVID. It really didn't help us with this committee whenever we were being slaughtered on media about golf clubs being funded and grassroots organisations not, because they didn't have that governance structure. I look forward to working with you on that. My first question is, when you talked about capital funding earlier, is that 100% capital funding, or is there match funding expected by those clubs or organisations that are successful?
I think it depends on the programme. So we have especially the larger the programme would be available, we would expect there to be a larger component of match funding. But I think we're trying to encourage match funding, and I think that's when we look across other jurisdictions and how they're operating capital programmes, they're even using the likes of crowdfunder that we're establishing as a way of putting resource out more quickly, but actually there's a match funding element. So we do have I
think it's just from my experience of working with you guys before, just following on from Brian's question about the percentage of what type of clubs or organisations might be getting funded. It's those that are actually ready to take on those capital investments, because they also are bringing money to the table as well. It takes time to do that.
It does, and that's also a challenge with the one-year budget, especially in the capital space.
Exactly. I wanted to ask you, obviously Sport NI have been very successful with some of our elite athletes, have been quite successful, I have to say, with governing bodies and what I would call the interim sports, the local level sports. It's the clubs and societies that we know and love. I'm very keen to find out more about what you're going to do with the grassroots that don't have governing bodies. How do we bring them on board? Might not look like an athlete, but I am involved in local sport and we have no governing body. But it means then that those local, for instance, parkrun you mentioned earlier, parkruns do not hold a load of money. It's usually a lot of volunteers together. It's not a governing body. Well, I don't think there's a governing body with parkruns. People just tend to get on with it. What's the plans going forward? Because I noticed in your Power of Sport, the 21 to 26 programme, is there a review taking place of that to identify the outcome one, people adopting and sustaining participation in sport and physical activity, a measurement of how the grassroots is coming up, that they might eventually get to that intermediate type level?
I think that's something at the heart of the work that we're trying to do right now. It is that it's not a shift away from one place to another, but it's an expanding out of our view, maybe taking a step back to do that. And I suppose I spoke to it earlier on, there's a formal or more formalised element of sport that we are probably considering as the likes of clubs, established clubs and governing bodies. And what we recognise, especially since COVID, has been how people engage in sport and physical activity, how they consume it, is fundamentally different. We need to be looking at the opportunities that are provided through commercial operators, gyms, and how they provide it. It's people walking from their door, running from their door. It is the likes of Parkrun and lots of other community groups, Facebook groups that are set up. Now, that's why we don't have an answer in that space right now, but that's why we're trying to talk to a wider range of partners. So the likes of Parkrun, UK does operate, and we can engage with them. But they're reflecting a body of about 143,000 people within Northern Ireland that engage, but there are so many other groups out there. So we're needing to broaden the partners we talk to. Talking to the community sport network, talking to Street Games, Sported, and not necessarily with a preordained idea of where we're going to go to, but actually to better understand the sector. We want to do that, but not drop those organisations at this stage. Where we're already investing, we want to understand the full picture and plan. And potentially a shift to recognise the shift that society has had in terms of how we consume sport and physical activity.
And can I ask then, Chair, sorry, it's just, we know that the Minister is taking forward a piece of work regarding charity legislation, and there is a potential for an exclusion for those organisations that are under £20,000 per year income, which, to be honest, is an awful lot of sporting groups. I'm just thinking, will you guys be contributing to that consultation? Because I'm very aware that you may well require company registration, in order to be able to access money. But if we have actually got a number of small organisations that just have to be constituted, will they be able to tie into Sport NI grants and funding going forward if that's something the Minister's taken forward in another part of the House? Is that something that you're aware of or can take part in?
Something we potentially have to look at. I think I'm aware there are the likes of the CIC community interest, where that has been used and potentially more prolific elsewhere in the likes of England.
This would be organisations that don't even qualify for that type of registration.
That's something we can look at and see what the impact
for instance, during COVID, we had a lot of problems with indoor bowls who weren't able to get funding because each individual group was an individual group as opposed to a part of a sporting body. There's no way they would have over £20,000 in their pockets. They'd be lucky if they had £20 in their pocket to be on at some stage just to pay for the hire of their halls. But a small grassroots funding can actually make such a difference to those smaller groups.
And look, I think that two things have come into my head around that. That speaks to a different way of operating and considering those others that we haven't necessarily picked up before. And also, I spent a day in Derry City and Strabane a couple of weeks ago with the council and neighbourhood renewal and getting around various facilities. And I think it just reinforced at that session, those sessions, that the importance of £500, the importance of £2,000, and the impact that can make. And I think we want to bring that in and actually reach out more, hear from the community planning partnerships, hear what's happening on the ground, and then convert that into change in how we operate.
And I think you're right. I mean, from our point of view, that's where we want to be. We want to be in that space where we support people through learning and development, and if we can intervene and support organisations, if you like, coach them through that process of getting to the point where they can apply for funding. Again, we're doing that with our training and development teams within sport. So yeah, it's certainly the way we would like to move.
My final question, Chair.
Please.
Climate change is on everybody's mind. To be honest, sport is the biggest buyer of transport in Northern Ireland. Is there anything that Sport NI can do to help to reduce the barriers for access to sport? And is there any negotiations happening with those transport suppliers that can support our clubs and organisations? Because in my local area, I am finding that people are not able to attend games and they're not able to go places because of the cost of transport. But also it's that concern about, we've very fit, able people and they're being driven about in gas guzzlers. Is there anything that Sport NI is thinking about as future plans on that?
I think in terms of the approach that we've taken in terms of the environmental has been more looking at the facilities at this stage, but it's an area we want to explore more. So I think it speaks again to how we consume sport, and raising awareness. And I think that we have a role there in terms of actually sharing the impacts, the potential impacts, the simple steps that can be taken, the car sharing and the likes. That's something we can certainly look at going forward.
Thank you, and good luck on the Olympics.
Okay, well listen, thank you, that's been a useful session, so thank you Richard, Brian and Simon, and appreciate you attending here this morning at committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
So members, content or anything further out of that session, or are we content to move on?
Can I just check, whenever the Deloitte report comes back, can we get sight of it then? Will that be made available to the committee?
Well, it was commissioned by the department, so we'll need to confirm that, but yeah, I mean, we can certainly come back to you on that. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you members. So members, I'm now going to take a short comfort break there till we get the next session arranged. So if we go back and ready to go at 11:20 there, please, members. Thank you.
Very good. You're getting generous today, giving us 9 minutes today. You usually give us 2.
And we're going into closed session now, members.
No, he was in hospital last week. I haven't heard from him since. So anyway, he was in touch with me by text.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you now. Should be back soon. Hopefully be back soon.
Yeah, if you're speaking to him, tell him I was asking for it.
Okay, no, will do.
I think we're still in open session.
Oh, in the camera. Anyway, right. Gotta be.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, members, thank you. So we're now in open session again and resuming our meeting at agenda item 5. And this is this morning a briefing from from representatives of various disabled people's organisations on the disability strategy. The briefing for this item, members, is at page 119, and I now welcome to the meeting the following representatives. So we have Tony O'Reilly from Northwest Forum of People with Disabilities via Zoom. Tony, are you able to hear and see us okay? Yeah, an indication there from Tony, thank you. June Best from IMTAC with support from Michael Lorimer. Amanda Paul, Centre for Independent Living. David MacDonald from the Omnibus Partnership, and Dermot Devlin from My Way Access. And June, before I invite you to make an open statement, I just want to say it's a session I'm very, very much looking forward to. It's issues very, very close to my heart. First of all, activism, and I think that's the first thing to say, inclusion, and also co-production and design, and the importance and necessity of that. I do want to say I'm very proud to know many of you and to have worked with many of you on various campaigns, and I do absolutely know that we are hearing this morning from people who are experts, and not only by experience but also experts in their own right in terms of the needs and the barriers and all of those issues, and in terms of your contribution to co-production design, I think that's absolutely fundamental. So I'll go back to yourself, June, maybe a brief opening statement if you can, please, and then we'll go to members' questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. We're all here today because we've outdone our patience. We really have. For many, many years, we have been looking for a disability strategy. And for many, many years, it hasn't been delivered. We've been let down. Our lives are difficult. Everybody's lives are difficult in this time of austerity. But we, as disabled people in Disabled People's Organisation, have really tried, have given it our all, have spent time, weekends, nights, working together to see how we can contribute our lives and the difficulties we face on a day-to-day basis, and share this with the departments and Department of Communities in particular for this occasion. We have wealth of experience, as you've mentioned, Chair, and amongst us. And I am only going to give you a very, very quick brief here to say that in January 2021, we were asked and invited by the Department of Communities to come together to look at and inform a disability strategy with the other inclusion strategies. It wasn't a straightforward issue at all. It had lots of challenges. And I would like just to say that the DPOs, I hope you don't mind me calling them the DPOs, Disabled People's Organisations, were with the disability sector organisations and alongside the Human Rights and Equality Commission, and also Unite trade unions. So we brought the whole disability sector together, and we were to work with co-production and co-design with the department. Now, unfortunately, at the very beginning, there was lots of tension between us all. There were misconceptions and preconceptions of what co-design and co-production meant. And for the DPOs, we were very frustrated, but we had meetings with the rest of the groups outside the department, which we facilitated as DPOs. And we facilitated these to get together to look at where we were coming, what we were doing, and above all, the priorities that we needed on a rights-based disability strategy, because we wanted this one to exceed. The last one, which took 6 years to develop, was never materialised. It was never implemented, and we don't know where it went. So that was another 6 years wasted. So we've worked tirelessly together. I've said that before, and I do repeat myself, and I better explain to those people who do not know me. I have no sight. I have plenty of vision, but I have no sight. And I'm trying to remember everything from memory, and I probably will garble, so please bear with me. So the co-production with the department, I was selected as, for my sins, as co-chair of the co-design working group. And we were working towards this rights-based outcome from the outset. Time went on, and we had meetings and meetings and meetings, and it was very apparent that what the department considered co-production and what the DPOs and the rest of the committee were looking at as co-production and understood the principles, that it was not an equal relationship. And the department's expectations were perhaps not our expectations and our understanding. But we went on, and eventually we had a consensus view to decision taking and decision making, which worked well. So very quickly, through this process, we designed a rights-based strategy and our key asks, and we worked all together. We worked really well together. What has happened is, at the end, when we had a draft strategy, which we all contributed to, at the end of that strategy, unfortunately, we never saw it. We weren't given permission to see the research that had been commissioned by the department, and we did not have the other material. We were not given the opportunity to look at the other material, which actually is not part of co-production, because we should have been, we felt that we had given so much of ourselves into this so that people would really understand the issues. We did have the chance to meet cross-departmentally, and that was an invaluable situation, because our lives are not compartmentalised. We have, a holistic approach to our daily lives, and we are interdependent on the services that we need. So, at the end of this process, we were selected by the whole group, the whole working group, to present our draft strategy with our position paper and our outcomes to the ministerial steering group of the executive. We knew what was in that. We also felt that it was important because we have not had sight of our work. We have never seen the draft strategy. We don't know where it is, whether it's been scrapped or whatever. But Minister of Communities, Mr. Lyons, last week mentioned that he would be looking at the disability strategy. But we want to know, is this our disability strategy? Is this the one we worked at? Are we being asked to complete this? Is it a different strategy? And where, are we being undervalued? Are we just being a token to put this together? We really, really don't know. And I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about this. I do apologise for that. Or maybe I shouldn't apologise for that.
You don't need to apologise for that, certainly.
But the other thing that has come through with this is that despite requests, we haven't even seen the research that was commissioned. And we had research and the report from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So we don't even know why that extra research was needed. At the end of the process, we were just literally, to use a colloquialism, dumped. And to ourselves, I'm afraid that was a slap in the face. The one thing that came out of the ministerial meeting was that there was empathy for us, that we were being totally realistic in this time of austerity. We know that everybody is vying for money, and you're bombarded with requests. But we did work tirelessly. We put all we had and all the resources we could into this. And I'm beginning to think, and this is the ironic side, I really am, and cryptic side of me, is this, where we just use this tokenism over 2 years? What is going on? Why is this not important? Our lives are really, really suffering. I'm going to say that I haven't got another 30 years to develop a proper, implemented, effective and positive disability strategy to improve the lives of disabled people in Northern Ireland. Scotland and Wales are working on policy statements, but we haven't got this. We don't know what's in that draft strategy. So there are all sorts of questions that we're here, but where is the strategy? And the one thing that came out of the ministerial committee meeting was the fact that we were going to be promised a regional disability forum to advise government departments. And there is also a precedent for that. I'm sitting here as Vice Chair of IMTAC, the Inclusive Mobility and Advisory Group to Government on Transport Issues. And we need transport for everything. We do. Everything is just tied up in this, and our lives are just continuing. Hot off the press, the report last week said from the UNCRPD report, United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, reported their written report last week, and I have to try and remember these words, clearly shows that there is still a systematic, grave human rights violations within Northern Ireland towards people with disabilities or disabled people. So I'm asking, please, can we see this strategy? Please, can we find all these questions out? Please tell us we're not, just the token disabled people. And we're not going to be added on to the end of policies. It's going to be a holistic approach, government departments working together. And I think, Michael, have I left, excuse me asking Michael if he's got my notes. Have I left anything out? Oh, yeah.
I don't think so, Jane, no. I think we covered everything.
So with that, I would like to invite you to ask questions. We have got, as I said, experts here, and we'll try and get the right person to answer the questions. And thank you for listening.
Yep. Thank you very much, June, and very, very, very worrying messages. My first question was going to be whether you had an understanding of whether the disability strategy was aligning with the work you'd done, but I think that's already been very clearly answered, and worryingly so. I have to say, for me, co-production and that issue around co-production should, well, first of all, I don't understand why departments at times appear reluctant as if it's something they need to do. It is absolutely the essence and the best value for money and the best advice they will largely ever get. The other thing is, for me, it should never be an event. It must be a process and an ongoing part of the process. And indeed, throughout the implementation of an eventual disability strategy, it's my belief that that review process should involve that element of co-production. So I'm very disappointed that a sense has been, a very clear sense has been communicated here of having taken part in the work, put your own efforts, expertise, sacrificed your own time into assisting the department in developing this strategy, to then be in the dark about what the strategy might contain at this point. And I want to say, I think fundamentally, as a basic courtesy, everyone who contributed to that work should be getting sight of it before it goes anywhere, before it goes out of the department, even before anyone else sees. I think that's a fundamental, just in terms of your co-production of it and your ownership of it in that sense. So 2 questions from me, and then I'm going to go to members. In terms of resource allocation, was there, as part of your work on this strategy, was there discussions of the need for specific resources to be allocated to ensure effective implementation of a disability strategy, and how those resources would be managed?
We were all unpaid when we were doing this strategy, and we were totally realistic about the funding and resources that would be needed for this. We, in fact, were laying the foundations and for pathways to be built on. But perhaps I could ask Michael, who do you think? I don't know who's beside me or around me.
And I'll watch for indications as well. So
Thanks.
I think throughout the process, resources were talked about, and the fact that we needed effective resourcing of the strategy. And I think at every stage there was pushback from the department and other departments too. But I suppose there are other things in the KIAS that are not about resources too. So, but I think, for instance, things like the regional forum and the legislative changes we're looking for do require resources, but there seemed to be a reluctance at every stage.
And will themselves be a resource?
Yeah.
And I think that's better how we need to look at it and to frame it. The other one I wanted to check with you was, during your part of this important work, was it clear what steps were being taken to incorporate the UNCRPD into legislation here? Did that form part of the work?
Tony?
Yep, okay, so Tony's coming in now, so we'll just give him a second.
He's muting himself.
Yep.
I'm trying. It won't let me unmute.
There you go, we can hear you.
We're hearing you now, Tony.
My apologies. Yes, as you'll know from committee members and chair, as you will know from the briefing paper forwarded to you by Michael Lorimer, we have asked for the incorporation of the UNCRPD as part of the strategy, and the incorporation of the UNCRPD into domestic law. There has been pushback from the department on this consideration, and in fact, in the original report from the expert panel, which included Professors Eleanor Flynn and Professor Bona Byrne, they set out the original report within the framework of the UNCRPD, and within the basic principle of incorporation. And we were asked initially not to do it within a human rights incorporated framework, but the independent advisory expert panel went against that. and went full on for incorporation. And indeed, it's one of the asks from the report, from the position paper that Michael has forwarded you today.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Okay, so I'm going to go now to members who have at this point Kelly, Marlisa and Sean. So Kelly, go Lanner Island Hull.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, June. Thank you to everyone who's come along today, and Tony online. I will say hello, friends, and I'll declare an interest. I used to be a member of IMTAC many years ago, and I have thought, talked and hugged most of the people that are in this room at some point. Thank you very much for coming along today. One of my first questions was, do you have the draft and can we get a copy of it? So you've answered that one already. Could I just check, and I don't mind who answers this question, the terms and conditions of the expert panel, you guys, whenever you were getting involved with doing this work with the department, was it very clear in those terms and conditions what your role was? Did they lay out very clearly how important your role was and the fact that you would have sight of the draft strategy, if you can remember back to those initial terms and conditions? Tony, yes.
So I have an indication from Tony. Go ahead, Tony.
Yes. Sorry, I should have said earlier. I was a member of the expert panel. The expert panel. The expert panel consisted of Professor Conor Byrne, Professor Eleanor Flynn, Sean Fitzsimons, and Tony Riley were brought together to develop an initial report to develop key recommendations for the development of a disability strategy, which it then followed that it was to be further developed by the co-design group. Mm-hmm. All of the members you can see here today in front of you on the panel. We had asked the expert panel, all members of the expert panel had asked that they would see the publication of both the report and the strategy before it went into the public domain. We further asked that no strategy, finalised strategy, be developed without the consent of deaf and disabled people's organisations and the wider co-design group, and that there should be further engagement with the department on this. There was initially agreement in principle that this would be done, but as June, the co-chair of the co-design group, has already advised, this hasn't been done to date.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just follow on from that, just to ask, co-production and co-design is a very unique and special thing that can actually make such better policy. I've heard from you today your frustrations that co-production and co-design seems to have come to a brick wall. It has stopped and all contact has ended. But can I ask, during the discussions, either with the expert panel or with the DPOs, at any stage were you guys asked if there was anything about co-production and co-design that could be improved for people with disabilities to be included in the strategy?
David?
Yes, if I recall rightly, we were, and we said there could. One of the comments that we made was that we didn't want a draft disability strategy going out with our names on it if it was changed dramatically from what we had worked on, because we didn't want our names put to something that was not what we were agreeing to. So we were very explicit with the officials, and indeed I think we spoke with the Minister on the same vein. We were well received, I have to say. The Minister received us extremely well, as did whoever else from the other ministerial departments attended. And I was one of the speakers at that group. And we were well received. It's just a shame that the thing paused at that stage. I hope it is a pause, because I think it should continue. I think a very relevant factor is June has already said that we do this free of charge, pro bono, so to speak. The department and the government benefits from having us there for nothing. And we are experts, not just in our own particular conditions. We're well geared, we're well educated, we're well experienced, and we discuss with other disabled people. We know our stuff. We are as expert as other experts are, as you stated, Mr. Chair. So they will be saving money to have this sorted They will also be saving money because I think, as June said, our recommendations are reasonable. We're not looking things to change overnight. We never are looking things to change overnight because it's not possible. Things change gradually. But if I look back to when the DDA came in 1995, when I was involved in protests and campaigning at that stage, and I look now at what has been achieved, there were no drop curbs in 1994. There were no accessible vehicles that I could use easily in 1994. There was little access to buildings in 1994. All of that has changed, and it's changed gradually. It's changed to some degree as things are being built. It hasn't cost a packet because it's been included in the design, as things are being changed. And that's where we need to go, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
I have one final question, Chair. I don't want to take up anybody else's time. I'm as angry as you are. I think that having worked with a lot of you and with people with disabilities for years, I don't know what the hold-up is. I also am aware that there's a budget coming forward without having a strategy in advance to inform that budget. Anecdotally, I have heard that there may be, the Minister and the Department may be planning to bring all the social strategies into one massive document. I would just ask how you would feel about that.
I would like to answer that.
Yep.
Happy enough, June?
Yes, absolutely, David.
I think there are problems if everything is combined together. Simply because things will be missed, things will not be seen. Disabled people's lives are particularly complex, in part because there's more than one disabled person. So there's a whole range of impairments that impact on people in different ways. Some people can have more than one impairment. Some people can be disabled and be poor. Some people are disabled and are women. So there is a cross match there, and I think that needs to be recorded in whatever document comes out. But I think to combine them all together completely misses what disabled people will need. I think we need to include, to some degree, one of the things that I was looking for at the time was that we meet with the other groups, and we never managed to do that. And I think we could do with doing that, certainly. I think because we do have similar problems. Ultimately, the discrimination is discrimination. It doesn't matter whether you're poor or you're a woman or you're disabled. It's discrimination. And I think from that point of view, we can look at trying to, but I think we need to keep the disability strategy separate, but include reference to the other bodies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
I think, it's fair to say the reason why we need these different strategies is because there are particular and specific challenges and issues that need addressed. It actually almost defeats the purpose if you start to merge them. So you need a strategy on anti-poverty, you need one on disability, you need one on gender and sexual orientation. These strategies have been brought forward because they're specifically needed for specific areas. So I think that's clear enough in that sense. Lisa?
Well, Fáidir Óvalig, you're all very welcome. It's Jas Búla Levsha. It's nice meeting with you. Agus buíos behind you the ratchets, June. And thank you for your statement, June. It was very, very comprehensive in many respects. Now, unlike Kelly, I'm not a hugger. But I do know Dermot in particular from when he was a student in the Northwest College in Derry. And I've admired the way that Dermot has progressed as a champion in every respect, and on behalf of the disabled and their rights. I'm actually shocked at your statement today as well too, and I know you used the phrase dumped, and the word that was in my head at the time was that you were patronised. They've involved you in something that where they'd never really intended to sort of progress it much further, sort of like just giving the nod to you, and patronising is the only word that can come to mind for me in that respect. And all the more reason why I do think, and I make this just as a statement, that strategy needs to be published. It needs to be published, and that they should provide an opportunity to you and to everyone to view that document. And there's an onus on us, even as a committee, and across the Assembly and the Executive, to challenge, expose and address inequalities in every respect. And we know in particular, even too within our own council areas and that as well, is very much an issue there, all the time, steady. And I think that our committee, we should be writing to the Minister and letting our support to the request for the Disabled People's Organisation, I am supporting you in any way that we can support you as well. And I wouldn't like to make that statement thinking that for 1 minute that it will end up falling on deaf ears and that once again it's patronising. And I wouldn't want to add to that, which I think you have already been subjected to.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I'll come back to that proposal. Sean, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Jane, my name's Shan. I'm sitting beside Kelly in the seat closest to you in our horseshoe setup. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to be here. I had questions that I had thought of before I heard from you, and to be honest, some of them seem fairly insignificant now that it's overtaken by the disappointment and anger of some of the things that you've said, particularly the use of the word token. I think that, as Militia has outlined, to feel like your expertise is being used as a token tick box angers me more than polite words can say in a committee, shall we say. But before I had heard, I am really interested in the process of co-design and bringing those with lived experience to the table and how we can do that in a really meaningful, non-tokenistic way. So I'm just wondering, June, you had spoken a wee bit about the tension at the start, those misconceptions and pre-perceptions of what co-design actually meant. And I'm just wondering, is there anything, aside from the end bit, is there anything that we can learn from that process of co-design? Was there anything that did work, or things that we can take learning from when we do this again, aside from what we would change as a result and at the end part? But in those early days of the formation of this panel, is there anything that we can learn and any best practice that we can take forward?
Thank you. Can I mention just first of all, and then I'll ask some of my colleagues to send. One of the things why co-design and co-production was so important is that those preconceived ideas are sometimes miles away, and misinterpreted perceptions. And I feel that if it was open and upfront and said, look, we want from you this strategy to improve the lives of disabled people in a holistic manner. And I think that if they were upfront and saying, well, actually, we have taken the expert panel's point of view at the time, and we all started from the same hymn sheet, rather than a goal at the end of it, which we felt that the department had, and we were working towards that goal. But it's the openness, and I have to say, in our we as DPOs in our section, we brought, with difficulty, we had meetings without the department to come to a consensual approach and to look at things together and understand each other. And we brought the whole sector together. And that is really, really important, that people express what they, what the outcomes they really want to do, want to achieve, and work towards that. And it just took meetings, as I said earlier, without departments, meetings among ourselves to realise how can we temper what we want into something that's manageable and realistic. So, Michael, I think you would be better to answer this.
I suppose one of the things I would say is that one of the reasons I was involved in the process, June was the IMTAC representative on it, but the department couldn't even provide June with the communication support she needed to co-chair effectively. So, essentially, I came in to do that job. But also, I think at every stage we were being told by the department we need to manage our expectations. And for instance, at the start there were meetings where things like important issues like independent living were being given 15 minutes in a meeting to discuss, and then we'll move on. And I think it was these guys, in terms of the co-design group, pushing back on that constantly to say, no, these are important issues, they affect our lives, we need to discuss these properly. I think we went to Minister eventually to try and get that process. So the process became better as it went along, but certainly there didn't, I don't know what everybody else thought, but there didn't seem to be any understanding about disabled people's lives and the barriers that we face in terms of
in communication as particular. Can I ask Amanda to say something?
The one thing I would say is there was constant, I mean, I know you've touched on it, constantly that pressure to get stuff done, and 15 minutes to do independent living. That's our lives we're talking about, and they're asking us to describe our lives and the lives of every other different disabled person in that 15 minutes. And I mean, we talked a lot about us guys being unpaid, but there was also people there from different companies and sectors that were paying big money for their staff to sit there, you know, and to constantly have this time pressure because the minister needed this bit of paper or that bit of paper or needed to be at this stage. And as we say, the disability strategy is a long time in coming. And even with this long time in coming, we're still being told at the end you're in a race. And then at the very end, you see nothing. And my fear at the minute is they turn around and say, let's start from the beginning again. And here we go on strategy number. We're into Roman numerals now. You know? I mean, it's crazy. We need to recognise that time given by us and money spent by others, and not actually start this whole thing again. We need to pick up where we left off and see the strategy.
Sorry. Go ahead, Dermot.
Oh, Dermot.
I'll come back to Dermot. Dermot, and then I'll come to David.
Well, just to pick up just on what Amanda and June were saying, you know, we would have to give her evidence and give her what we're going through, sometimes in the space of 15 minutes. But that's coming from the preconceived notions of what the non-disabled members were feeding into this, saying that this is what we want the goal to be. So they were a lot of time giving us big presentations of what they want to do and how they're going to do it. And we would only have 15 minutes to say, well, that's not right, this is our life experience. So yes, we'd have these big meetings, but we would have to cram into a lot of space what we're doing because you know, Department of Community Ministers and workers were coming in with these ideas what it should be and not what we feel it needs to be. So we didn't get a lot of time to do that, and as Amanda and Jenna said, it put a lot of pressure on us, especially since we were doing this off our own back. We weren't getting paid on, but we felt we still had the pressure to deliver, not just on the people around the table today, but to deliver for everybody who is deaf and disabled across Northern Ireland, the North. So you know, the 15-minute gap wasn't enough, and we needed to go in with an open mind, tell us, to ask us what we need, not to tell us this is what we're doing.
Yeah, when you have experts in front of you, you should be inclined to listen rather than speak. I have to say, Tony, I know you're indicating there. I'm going to go to David first, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I think there were a number of conflicting time constraints going on. The minister was aware that her time was coming to an end more quickly than it might have been otherwise, and I think there was pressure from that direction. And one of the points I would make to that is, since the pressure was there, and since there was that time constraint, surely we can use this valuably and pick up and run from where we were at, as opposed to maybe losing everything that was done in that tight time. I think another aspect of a time constraint was that, as Dermot said, I think the officials didn't really understand where we were coming from, what the pressures are on us to try and get things together. And I think they had preconceived notions, as Dermot said, of non-disabled people and of officials presumably in their heads as they almost wanted a tick box exercise from us, for us to approve what they were proposing. And we weren't going down that route, and we adamantly refused to go down that route. The final thing I would make with regard to the process, the officials had no knowledge of disabled people's communication and information needs, none whatsoever. I mean, June had really big problems, as has been described by Michael and herself. Even I had problems getting the document in the right format. I do PDF, not various other ones, and to try and get that was quite tricky too. But they had no knowledge as to how we communicate, how we need to communicate, and what length of time some of that takes for us to do so. I use a voice system to type. It doesn't always work effectively. It can take time to go back over it 2 or 3 times to get it fixed. So that takes extra time that maybe wouldn't be there if I were writing. But it's getting the officials under. I think the officials need training if they're going to work with disabled people at that level as to how disabled people need certain things.
Thank you. Very, very important element for going forward for all departments and for all co-production and design processes. Tony?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, it's important to recognise that the expert panel people, 3 of which were deaf and disabled people, they were paid £2,500 each for developing the original report. For my part, the money went to the Northwest Forum of People with Disabilities, my organisation, but we were paid for the expert panel was paid, but nobody, no deaf and disabled person on the co-design group were paid for their 2 years of work or for their expertise on the panel. Just to clarify that there was some financial. The other thing, just to say in respect of, since the 1999 Disability Rights Task Force recommendations, the Development of Equal Lives Disability Strategy, which was published in 2009, and then this now the 3rd strategy, we haven't had a disability strategy in 21 years. Now, one of the things, one of the key asks in the strategy was legislative reform, highlighted there by Michael Lorimer. Now, the key asks for legislative reform have been asked for since 2009 by the Equality Commission. And we're now in 2024, and none of that legislative reform proposals, for example, has been passed. And indeed, there has been no equality or human rights legislation passed by the Northern Ireland Assembly since it came into existence. I think beyond the Autism Private Members Bill. That's not a great indictment of the Assembly since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement came into being. And that's why the Disability Co-Design Group and all of these, all of the members you see before you, David, June, Michael, Dermot, Amanda, all of these people sitting before you today are here today. This is what we want. So we've been hanging about now for over 2 decades for a disability strategy that we've all worked on, that we've all put blood, sweat and tears in. And we're asking today, where is it? Are we going to get one? What are the outcomes going to be? Yes, there have been positives. The fact that deaf and disabled people have been directly engaged with by the department, they attempted co-production and co-design, the fact that they got an expert panel together made up of deaf and disabled people, including a DPO, those are positives. So don't want to be totally negative, but at the end of the day, we're still sitting here with 0 outcome.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So listen, I'm conscious now time is marching on us, but I've Ciara and Brian there.
Okay, that's more comment, and then I've just one question. So thanks each and every one of you, not only the panel here in front of us and the organisations represented, but also individuals in the gallery. I really appreciate and you're taking your time out of your busy life schedules to come along here today to update us on what has been, as mentioned, and like my colleague here, let down and dumped. And that's 2 key things. And I'm conscious not only for yourselves, but we've heard something similar with regards to the anti-poverty strategy and others. Co-design, really a lot of work needs to be done on that. And I think what we've heard today, there's a couple of key lessons need to be looked at. So along the request of urgently bringing back yourselves, the co-design group and the expert panel, that's something the department needs to do. I think likewise the department, and to support other departments in moving forward, an evaluation of your experiences through that process over the last year back in 21-22 and how you felt. What was the good? Because as I'm assuming there was good aspects, but there was also not so good, and we need to learn from that, and all other departments need to learn from that. And I think hearing your voices would be critical for all other departments and moving forward. So that would be another key area. an area that was mentioned, and obviously the research report as well. What was the research carried out, and what was the impact of it? That's another key ask that we need to ask the department. But you mentioned, and I think, and I'm very supportive of all of your 8 key asks in your paper. One of them that you highlighted was the dearth of data, and that's another consistent message I'm hearing across departments. Can you throw some light on that, and what needs to happen around the dearth of data that currently exists?
Thank you, Ciara.
Tony?
Tony?
There is the dearth of data that currently exists is huge, and it's on every aspect of our lives, whether it's independent living, whether it's on social security, whether it's on employment or whatever. There is insufficient data in terms of the impacts of disabled people on social policy. And it was also highlighted. It was also highlighted in the concluding observations by the UNCRPD committee, and it's also been highlighted by both the Equality and Human Rights Commissions, who I know were also in the gallery here today. It is a huge issue. Article 31, of the Convention, the requirement to collect data and to inform policy. There's literally no data. I know from doing the research, assisting with the research for the independent mechanism when they were giving their report to the UNCRPD, we were depending on UK-wide data or oral communications with deaf and disabled people, because the impact of policies just wasn't there in terms of the impact on, for example, like accessible housing, transport. They're just the departments are not prioritizing data sufficiently and it's not just for disabled people, but it crosses right across all of the inclusion strategies. Data collection is not a priority of the government.
Can I add to that? The irony I find is that when you try and prove a case with departments, they ask you for data, and yet they don't go and get the data.
Yeah.
So we need data in order to prove cases, both for ourselves and for the government, for yourselves. And I mean, an example is Encompass, which I'm sure everybody's heard of by now. And the question has been asked, will it provide data? And we still haven't got an answer.
No, thank you for Tony, and I think that's another key area as well, because how can you develop key actions and then measure those actions and outcomes if we don't have a baseline and we don't have that data? And you would expect that should have been our first protocol in the start of any process for the strategy. Just thank you all, each and every one of you. You've really given an insight into the process you have been through. It's totally unacceptable, and I'm very much supportive of ensuring that we can drive forward and get that delivered, but it needs to be in partnership with and full involvement with yourselves, because you are the experts, so thank you.
Can I add something else? There is a best practice here within the Assembly departments. The Department of Health established a regional disabled people's health and social care forum a couple of years back. We were all part of that, of establishing it, and we are all part of being on it. So the Department of Health actually have a disability strategy running as a regional disabled people's health and social care forum, and we are listened to, and we are involved, and we try and move all of that ahead. So the example is there. It's not as if it's not done. It is done, but it needs the right sort of attitude. Yeah. The right frame of mind to take it forward.
Yeah. And the right focus and resource to keep that going. And it is, as I say, itself a resource. Brian, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your attendance and your presentation so far. I'm learning from all of what you're saying. 2 questions. Tony's partly answered it, but if you could just set out for me what has happened previously in terms of legislation. David, you're referring to changes which I think followed on from the Disability Discrimination Act, maybe 1995. Then there was the Equality Act 2010 didn't apply in Northern Ireland, is that right? But you said it was 21 years since something previously, so I'm trying to work out, was there something then 2003? But anyway, if Tony maybe could just set out the main landmarks which have applied or not applied in Northern Ireland.
Sorry, if I can answer the DDA bit, sorry, Tony.
Yeah.
The DDA was introduced in 1995.
Yeah.
It was introduced after, I think, 17 attempts from around the 1970s by disabled people to try and get anti-discriminatory legislation. It was introduced in 1994 as a private member's bill. It fell at that because it ran out of time. There were issues around the government conspiring to have it run out of time, which was then discovered by the press. So when it was coming up the next year, 95, the Conservative government at the time decided to write their own. Initially that was all around employment, nothing else. Disabled people campaigned and fought and to have that broadened out to come close to their bill. And we therefore got a range of items within that range of changes. Transport, services, buildings, everything. But they all came in as a rolling programme, so they came in over time. They didn't come all in at the same time. Transport, for example, was 2017. So that was the general anti-discrimination bill against disabled people. Because it wasn't absolutely complete, it didn't, for example, include people with MS. There were problems with people with MS because the description of somebody who's disabled is someone with a long-term condition. MS can go into a recession. And so that was causing problems with people with MS being recognised under it, and people with AIDS and people with cancer. So those three groups were included in 2010. The bill was brought up. It was a bill in Northern Ireland, not an act. It was the Disability Discrimination Act in GB, and it was the Disability Discrimination Bill 2010 over here. I'll let Tony follow on from that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Tony, please.
Just to advise, the legislative reform that the Equality Commission is proposing is one to harmonise it with the requirements under Article 5 of Equality and Non-Discrimination of the UNCRPD, but also to ensure parity of equality with Northern Ireland and Great Britain. The Equality Act, for example, doesn't provide for indirect. The Equality Act provides for indirect discrimination, for example, but it doesn't provide for indirect discrimination here. So a policy can be enacted that indirectly discriminates against disabled people, and disabled people, for example, here in Northern Ireland don't have any recourse to the law. The Equality Commission's proposals are set out on its website, but I know also that I think Paul Noonan is there from the Equality Commission, and Paul can certainly, or a representative of the Equality Commission, can give you access to the details of those proposals rather than going into it now. Just to clarify, I referred to the Disability Rights Task Force recommendations in 1999, which coming from that then led to the PSI working group in 2003, which went on for, I think, about 3 to 4 years. And then it developed the Equal Lives strategy. That wasn't to do with legislation, that was to do with the development of a wider disability strategy. And as the co-chair, June Best, has already made clear, that was never implemented and never followed through, despite a commitment from both the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to us that it would be implemented. We met with them both. So that was what I was referring to there. It was about the disability strategy. But the legislation is, our equality legislation is, it doesn't come close to matching the requirements of the Equality Act. And indeed, the Equality Act itself doesn't even meet the requirements of Article 5, Equality and Non-Discrimination, of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So our legislation, our equality legislation, is in a fairly poor state at the present time.
Can I just? So, well, sorry, is this on this, Michael?
It is on
ahead.
this
Yeah.
specifically. It sort of feeds into the wider issues we have here. You know, it's been 14 years since the Equality Act came into place. You know, we've been living for 14 years with this disparity between GB and Northern Ireland. Tony talked about Disability Rights Task Force. One of the recommendations was to extend the rights under Part 4 of the DDA to the use of transport. We had to fight tooth and nail to get that in. It was brought in GB in 2006. I think eventually we got it here in 2010-11. And it just seems constantly we have to fight to keep up. And it's that lack of commitment from government. It really demonstrates, nothing demonstrates the lack of commitment. We were told whenever the co-design process talked on legislative reform, we may be able to tackle some elements of the disparity. We might be able to do one or two things, but we can't do it all. And we're saying, after 14 years, why are we still talking about skirting around the edges? Where is the real commitment here towards disabled people and our rights?
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Without going into a long answer, because I'm aware of the time pressures, again, David, you touched on the work of the Department of Health with the forum they've set up. This sits with DF's Department for Communities, but I'm slightly surprised it's not with TEO, because it would be a cross-cutting strategy affecting every department, and your paper sets out all the various sectors. I think every department effectively, and as I'm sure they currently do, try to address disability equality matters. So my question is, are you involved with all those departments? Or, I know you came together specifically for this job of work, but I'm sure you have engagement with departments, or do you?
Are we engaged?
Yes.
We do. We try to. We obviously can't go to every single one in the same way, but we were working through the Department for Communities to try and get that started. The idea was to have a disability forum with each department. That's why I'm highlighting the health one, because it's up and running, because we work with health to do that. And MTAC would be a similar thing with the Department for Infrastructure. So other departments are lacking that, but the lead has to come from communities, because that's what their responsibility is, and that's why we're pushing to get this through. The idea is that we set up a regional disabled people's forum with the Department of Communities, and that branches off and sets up others amongst the other departments. As I said, 2 of them are already set up, so it's the remaining departments need to look at.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Tony's indicating then. Tony, go ahead then. Finally.
The disability employment and disability working group that was meant to be the Disability Employment Stakeholder Forum, which is the Department for Communities. That was meant to have disabled people involved in it, and done in a co-production and done in a co-design way. The Northwest Forum of People with Disabilities co-chaired it for 6 years, but it was really the only DPO involved, and it only had one representative. There has been no disabled people involved in the development of the disability and employment strategy, and it was one of the issues we raised with the UN committee in August. So we're looking for the Department for Communities to work more closely with, for example, disabled people in the area of employment. And in particular, we would like to see the greater involvement of people with learning disabilities and people with mental health issues within these co-design processes and working groups within the departments as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, listen, that's been a very useful session in the sense of clarifying, and I think really, even though we had the briefing, I think hearing it, just the lack of engagement with you is really something that's, just in terms of professionalism and that to glean the work that you have put in and to make sure that that's part of the strategy is hugely important. The committee, I think, will be looking at a number of follow-up actions here that will address some of the issues you have raised, and we will want to keep an eye on this issue, and I think that'll be something that we'll. But for now, we deeply appreciate your time, I have to say, and we're very conscious of how difficult it can be to even just turn up here and give this evidence, and I do deeply appreciate the fact that you have come here today and that we have had people with real expertise setting that out. The department have also had the benefit of that expertise, and I want to see that coming through into the strategy. So I think the committee will as well. So thank you, June. Thank you everyone for your contribution, and we will pick up on the various elements that have been raised as part of the briefing.
Can I just thank you on behalf of us all for giving us the time to listen and to listen to our passion. It's our lives, but something, if you can remember, it's nothing about us without us, and that makes all the difference. If you would take that on board, please, when we're talking about other departments as well.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And all the best, are more everyone. Okay, thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay. Clerk. Is there anything more specific on any of these, or just covered in the
They're
memo?
covered in that if you go through it. It's just that's the only place we can upload them to the system.
Yeah.
So if you just work through them and use the page numbers to direct
So,
people.
in terms of whatever
Trying to get a harness on a dog here.
so I've covered a lot of these. Well, I'm going into the SL1s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Registered
Just get
rents.
this on and sort myself
Are
out.
you missing?
I'm missing all of the rest of after that.
You have mine. Swap.
Need it, so where are we at?
Watch it.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
You want to get up?
Okay, thank you.
Ellie, go ahead then.
I was just going to ask, could we get a present? I know we're going to have our away day next week, but one of the things maybe we could put on the list for the away day is a presentation from the department specifically on the disability strategy, what's happening with it. I know I've been asking questions about the strategy and where it is, and I just think it's time that we got them on record.
Yeah, I think we also need to write to the department and say that the committee believe that the members who contributed should urgently see sight of the draft, and they should see it before any draft is released anywhere else.
Absolutely.
Are members content?
I think they need to reconvene. They need to reconvene the expert panel and the co-design group to update them on the strategy and the research.
The last action from the committee, which has been sent to the department, was requesting a briefing in confidence. A confidential briefing came out of the last meeting on all of the social strategies. Is this a letter in addition to that, or a request in addition to that?
That as a committee we need to know what the strategies, what's happening with them, but there's a lot of responses to what we've heard today may after that need to be on the record. Yeah, so if we get the confidential briefing, and then we'll need to go public, I think, with responses to some of the things that we've heard, because I'm very concerned. I declare an interest as a person with a hearing loss, as a person who's a member of the disability community. I'm disgusted at the fact that we don't have a strategy. We can hear from the department what they're planning to do, but I think we need to answer disabled persons' issues publicly after that. We can make that very clear to the department that we have the two-pronged approach with them, that confidentially they can certainly share with us that detail, but some of the issues raised here about disabled people feeling abandoned is something I think we need to do more in public.
And I think there's important, sorry Melissa, I think there's important evidence there as well for all departments nearly around the needs to consider how you engage with that sector to get the most out of their expertise and so I'm not sure how we might do that, but maybe Claire, can you suggest how we might draw all the committee's attention just to the need to pick up on what we've heard?
I understand that in the executive office department there is a working group within NICS of disabled employees, and there is a resource there.
Internal.
It's only internal.
That's what I was trying to pick up at the end, because we could publish, or our department could publish a strategy, or the communities department, but it's all other departments, all the action plans, all the action points flowing from that are relevant to every other department. So I think it is relevant to ask each department, or each committee, how they're engaging with that sector.
Well, specifically
The EO committee.
What I'm suggesting is that what I'm really suggesting, and members can make their own suggestion. What I'm saying is that in terms of the the very poor, or in terms of the learning from how you engage and how you facilitate that communication, that we flag that to other. You know, our role is to scrutinise the communities, but I think if we could flag it, it would be useful information for anyone.
Can I just clarify? We're going about this the wrong way here. The Department for Communities is tasked with providing the disability strategy for the executive.
Yeah.
It is not a one-stop shop just for communities. This brings in health, and that's why they've already said that all of the other departments took part in that discussion.
Yeah.
If communities are going to play the game, but they're only going to do it within their own department, then what is the point in having a disability strategy? Every department has their own internal NICS disability programme that they have to do for their own staff. We're not asking this is a public joined together one.
The strategy hasn't been published yet.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's the question, you know, like that's what we should be asking. That we should see that, and just as they had expressed that view as well too, that they would have been entitled to, if anything, being the first stop shop in relation to the strategy and that as well, should they have needed feedback and that on it, you know, and that I go back against this recommendation that I was making earlier on, that is in fact what we should be doing, as asking for that publication and to see it.
So writing to the Minister, asking for the advisory group to have sight of the draft strategy that they input to, and that the committee also have sight of that draft strategy with a confidential briefing.
Absolutely. That if that's the way it has to be for the Minister, that absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's first stop shop, and from there we move on it.
And maybe an update on the research that they commissioned. The expert panel group and the co-design group don't even know what research was commissioned. I just find that. But another thing is, I think what they need to consider, and I would put in a request, they need to evaluate the individual's participation on it. And that can be a simple evaluation form sent out, but they need to evaluate the process so they can learn from the process. And I know co-design, there's no point we all say co-design if we're doing a strategy, a disability strategy, and people feel a process, the department hasn't got a process right to even cater for their basic needs. That's really extreme. Where you're working with people to develop a strategy and you couldn't even cater for their needs. You couldn't even take into consideration the process and agree a process from the start. So there needs to be an evaluation, and that's not to take away that there's probably some really good stuff that did happen during that process, but it needs to be, we need to continuously learn. So if there's no evaluation of the process, how are they going to continue to learn? Because I'm just conscious of the other strategies, because when the neighbour renewal partnerships came here, they were saying the same thing regarding the co-design process. They didn't feel at the start that it felt like a co-design process, and it was constantly challenging. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think there could be valuable lessons, and the department could take the lead on that for all our departments.
Okay. Members content then with those actions?
Yep.
Okay, members, moving on then to item table paper SL1, universal credit.
Just before we move on, I know today we were due to have a briefing from NICFA, and they haven't been able to come today. Did they give the reason why?
I understand they had committed the date for an all-party group event.
I think I'd just like to put it on record that to turn down a statutory committee for an all-party group, I don't know whether after, obviously the Assembly's been up and down, but all-party group work, while it is very useful, shouldn't take precedence over a statutory committee. We will be going forward and trying to fight on behalf of and with the Minister and to help the department about the community and voluntary sector, but they're not coming here. Have they asked for an alternate date?
Not at this point.
They've asked that they brief again at some stage, but obviously that's something for the committee to consider.
Yeah, until after the planning day.
Sure. I'd just like to note my disappointment as well, and I would concur with Kelly. It's quite disappointing that they could not present here today.
Now, just declare an interest as a charity trustee. In terms of, can I just clarify when the invite went out to them? How much notice were they given?
I would need to double check that. So on the forward work programme, they've been listed for a number of weeks with a TBC to be confirmed, but I can double check on the date and email that round members. We usually give all attendees at least 2 weeks advance notice.
I think my annoyance comes from the fact that the all-party group is at 1 o'clock, which is after this committee.
Is it
during
one
the
of, was it not
Starts at
12?
12.
12 o'clock?
No, it's rescheduled. It's not starting now, quarter to one.
so they could have been here.
So it's-
I've seen one mentioned as well as quarter to one.
No, it's tea and coffee, quarter to one, and it starts at 1
Starts at 1 now.
Here in the building.
in the dining hall.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, thank you for that. So I'm going then through to tabled SL1 Universal Credit Administrative Earnings Threshold Amendment Regulations NI 2024 on page 116. The purpose of this proposed rule is to raise the Universal Credit Administrative Earnings threshold to 18 hours per week at the national living wage for single claimants, or for couples a total of 29 hours between them at the national living wage from 13th of May 2024. This is equivalent to £892 for single claimants and £1,437 for couples. So do members have any comments, or are they content for the department to proceed to make this rule?
Great.
Content, members, thank you. Item 7 then, which is page 125, SR 2024-99, the Registered Rents Increase Order NI 2024. This is at SL1 stage, members. We had decided that we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule, but we did write to ask how many people would be affected by the rent increase and how many affected by it are in receipt of housing benefit. The department's response is at page 77 of your table papers, and it states 334 tenancies are affected by the rent increase, and of these 126 tenancies are in receipt of housing benefit. The examiner's most recent report, the 11th report, was published on Tuesday and is attached in your table papers at page 40 and includes Rule 2024/19. So do members have any objection to the rule, or any objection to this rule, members?
No.
No. Thank you. So therefore I put the question that the Committee for Communities has increased has considered SR 2024/99, the Registered Rents Increase Order NI 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 8 then, members, is correspondence. So I refer members to the correspondence memo at page 131 of your meeting packs, and to the tabled correspondence memo at page 33 of the table pack. Do members have any comments in relation to any of the items of correspondence in either of those two memos?
I would just declare that this as well as been the chairman of NESCO, which is a registered charity.
Okay. Any other comments, members?
Sorry, can I just ask, the public consultation, just to clarify, it's been a while, does this committee give our response back to the public consultation that DFC are doing on the threshold for small charities?
Really can submit a response.
We'll talk about it next week, sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so members therefore content to action the correspondence is outlined in the memos. Yep. Thank you. Agenda item 9 then, members, forward work programme, which is in your table pack at page 3. You'll find the clerk's memo there at page 3, in relation to next week's planning session. There's also a draft agenda at page 9, along with details for the off-site meeting, as an off-site from here in Dungannon, and the committee planning session for next week for your review and comment. So you'll find the updated forward work programme document in the table pack at page 22. We obviously have our strategic planning session next week, when the focus will be on agreeing and prioritising a work programme beyond the meeting on 16th of May, when we will have several briefings in relation to the forthcoming defective premises bill. So members, we're asking everyone to identify your top 5 priorities for the committee planning session to the clerk by noon by next Tuesday by email. So that'll allow us to form a kind of a matrix of where the combined committee's interests are and how we manage to schedule all of that. Do you want to say anything about that, clerk, at this point?
Yeah, no, what I'll do is collate all of that and then update a presentation, and we can then have a process of assigning dots to try and weight each and come up with our top list.
Yeah, it's clearly something we're going to have to be very conscious of throughout, given the scope and scale and complexity and pressing nature of a range of issues across this department. We are going to have to be very, very focused and strategic as to how we schedule these things in, and to allow time to get the information. So that'll be a very useful session, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you all to Dungannon for that.
Just to clarify, I mean, in terms of like the long list we're working off, it's any of the matters really under the remit of this committee, and any of the presentations that we've received, we just pick what we consider to be our top 5 priority areas.
Yes.
But all that'll be fed into then the planning session next week, and the decisions will be made then at the meeting.
Well, flowing from so that part of that discussion will form part of the decision. Then we'll come back then with a kind of a draft plan for members to have a look at.
Okay.
Just remind me, do we have the timeline of what legislation the Minister is moving forward throughout this mandate? We really need that.
The Clerk's memo alludes to where they've been referenced as a specific timeline we don't have in writing.
We would possibly request that, just a potential timeline. I know we have it for justice, and it's quite useful for a strategic planning day then, and set in the context of what the volume of legislative work that we're going to be involved in and where the pressure points are going to be, to coincide with then what other key areas.
I've asked for it a couple of times in writing, confirmation of it. Committee has already asked for it, and what we've been given is a sense of what we understand is coming pre-summer, and one bill in autumn, and that's it.
We have been asking nearly from the outset, really.
Yeah. It would also be really useful.
Push again maybe. Let's just ask again, given that we have a planning session next week.
It would also be really useful if there was any indication of budgetary pressures or what asks were put in for a funding pot from Department of Finance when setting the budget, just so that we can get a bit of an idea of, we know how much it costs to deliver the statutory stuff, where are we actually going to sit with that, given that all departments are facing so much pressure. So it would be good to understand the lay of the land when it comes to that.
I think we have a request in for a briefing on the budget.
25, yeah.
Okay, so
Mine's is more, it's about defective premises, but I can do it under AOB if you want.
okay, I'm moving just into AOB now. So any other business members? Kelly, go ahead.
I know that the defective premises, the Minister's taken that forward, thank goodness for that. I've received communication from a person that I can certainly share with the clerk if the committee's in agreement. They have said that a replication of the English law will not actually help the Victoria Square residents or owners. Something about under the English defective premises law section 1356, I think it is, but I can send the reference over, that any person that's been involved in a legal case that has been struck out, as they have been because the law here didn't extend to their length, their time periods, it would prevent a future claim then being taken forward. And I just wouldn't mind, I know it's accelerated passage, but I don't know if the department are looking at that aspect of it to ensure that whatever they are bringing in, because we haven't seen it yet, will enable those Victoria Square owners to be able to go again. Yeah.
Is he clarity on?
I can email the copy around everyone if you want.
So if he shares the correspondence, we can include it for the pack for the 16th.
Okay.
I received that as well this morning. I'm not sure if it was sent to everybody or not. So.
Could well be. It was the very early hours of this morning.
Indeed.
Well, then we've all received it. So, but I'll send it to yourself because it does have a reference in it about the reference in the legislation. I don't have permission from the person to share their email, but I can ask them.
You can redact that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other business members? No, thank you. So I'm moving on to item 11, date, time and location of the next meeting. Can I just say before I confirm that, I want to thank the clerk and the entire team here for the work they have done on all of these sessions, and today's I think was particularly useful, but there's a lot of work goes into all of that, and I think they've really hit the ground very quickly to provide us with those sessions, and I just want to thank the clerk and all of our staff for that. So members, our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday 9th of May in Four Steps Women's Centre in Dungannon, and the meeting is now adjourned, and it will take a minute or two to go into closed and to end the broadcasting.
For convenience, can we get the address and directions just for the Four Steps Women's Centre?
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.